So if Kurt and I sound different, it's because we're taller.
What you're going to say next is pretty anticipative.
It's sort of a middle ground between doing nothing and doing something violent.
Probably the creepiest song of all time that we all love.
Keeping this in the gutter just for a second because this is smart drivel.
The other fingers are there just there for decoration and for flipping the bird. Well, a big howdy hello to you hooligans out there. That's a lot of H's, John. Kurt Schneider, co-host of Smart Drivel here.
There's an H in Schneider, so you got that going. And I'll go with this as Jonathan Ellenthal, your co-host, because there's an H in my first and my last name, Kurt.
Hello, John.
Hello, Kurt. The good news for our listeners is this episode is not about the letter H.
No, we're not Sesame Street.
We are not Sesame Street, although, you know what I've noticed? A bunch of people will say to me, you know, you remind me of one of my kids. And I think I've noticed a pattern that a lot of people have made a comment that I remind them of their young children. Kurt, is that a compliment? I'm not so sure.
It's 100% a compliment. Look, think about it. Kids have this wonderful outlook on life before they get bombarded, discarded, and filled with lard about life. And so I would say that just means you have a wonderful, ebullient, optimistic view of life. So keep it. Hold on to it.
On good moments, I do. Filled with lard was a particularly fun turn of phrase there, Kurt, when they literally get filled with lard. So I've never read anything about this, but I've heard it talked about. There is apparently it's normal, a big gap between your age and how old you feel you are inside. And I've heard people say that it's like a 20 to 30 year difference between how old you actually are and how old you feel. And I, despite being 56 years old, do feel like I'm 24 years old on the inside. How about you?
Oh, absolutely the same. In fact, I had this problem with my kids the other day because they were talking about something. And I said, oh, yeah, that's like your grandparents' generation. And both of them said, that's your generation, Dad. So I don't get it yet, but that's okay.
So, Kurt, we're going to continue in Smart Drivel tradition to do an entire episode of the podcast based on a comment that came from a previous podcast. It's like a self-generating thing.
Yeah.
And you
what
recently,
was it?
Well, I'm going to tell you, and I think it's something you said, although it's possible it's something I said. I've narrowed it down to the two of us. One of us said, I think it was you, it is not possible to tickle yourself. Was it you who said that?
No, you did.
Was it me who said that?
Yes.
Okay, so the point is, I knew it was one of the two of us. And it's true that you cannot actually tickle yourself. But that led you and I into a discussion about other unusual, crazy, not all that well-known, remarkable things about the human body. So this episode is entirely about crazy things about the human body.
You know, we talked about in the very beginning about when you're a kid and you get filled with lard. I didn't even think at the time how pertinent that is to the discussion, because I believe, and I don't know the fact on this one, which I know that's funny to hear me say because I seem to know the facts on a lot of things. Ha, ha, ha.
Well, you know a lot of facts, Kurt. They just don't happen to match the statement you're making at the time.
So I said when they get filled with lard, I think like the Pilgrims and the 17th and 18th century and 19th century Northeasterners who got their tallow from whales in order to make their oil burn and fat. The human body does have a lot of lard in it. And I think it's enough to have like 3 pounds of fat. It could burn candles for 3 days.
So let me get this straight. You're saying that there's enough flammable fat stuff in our body that we could actually light it on fire and that we could sustain that flame for days?
Yeah, probably cook s'mores over it.
Well, that's a lovely thought to kick us off. I would like to point out, Kurt, that we are doing something unusual for us during this episode, and that is we are recording in the morning. We don't typically record in the morning. And the reason we're recording in the morning is that you and I are taller in the morning. I assume everybody else is as well. And file this under gravity is not just a good idea. It's the law category. Apparently, the cartilage in our bones compress during the day, making us shorter. but we're about 1 centimeter taller in the morning. So if Kurt and I sound different during this podcast, it's because we're taller.
Yeah, ½ inch taller. So I'm going to go to DMV in the morning, therefore, and get measured for my license.
I think they're 2.5 centimeters in an inch. So that would make it about 40% of an inch.
How about those people, and we all know them, in pictures, they stand up on their tiptoes so they look taller? Come on, people, just accept and go.
Well, I know that people stand up. I know I do this. I stand up on my tiptoes in the pool. Do you do that? I assume everybody does that.
I see it, but that's different than in a photo.
I understand, but what if you're in the pool having your picture taken? I see you're making a different point, but I assume we stand on our tiptoes in the pool because it's like a survival thing, and we want to keep our head and our mouth above the waterline as far as we possibly can.
Speaking about survival, one thing that as we talk about amazing facts about the human body, goosebumps. You know, we all get goosebumps, how amazing they are on your skin when something happens and you get scared or some sort of titillation. It's because we got goosebumps, part of evolution. We evolved to get these because our ancestors, it would make their hair stand up. So that way they could be more threatening to predators out their way. So your hair would come up and that would give you, and if you did it in the morning, you'd get not only your hair, but an extra ½ inch, and you could be even seen bigger.
40% of an inch, Kurt. There has to be some attention to detail in this podcast. And that is our entire attempt right there for attention to detail. And now we'll go back to our normal approach to things. So I had the good fortune of being on a safari in Africa with my family a number of years back. And I remember the same concept being talked about with the elephants. And I assume all animals do this because it's a survival thing. When an elephant feels threatened in some way, its ears go out and make it seem much larger than it otherwise would seem. Although I've never met an elephant that I didn't go, whoa, that's big. Ears out or not.
So an old elephant could make their ears really big, because something cool about the human body is your nose and your ears keep growing. You know how the old people have ears that start at the top of their head and go down to their shoulders? Because they keep growing. Their cartilage keeps growing. But you know what does not keep growing?
What's
your
that?
hair and your fingernails after you die. You know, that's an urban legend. And in all these horror movies, when they dig the people up and their hair's long and their fingernails are long, that's not true. Urban legend, not true.
How do you differentiate between an urban legend and an old wives' tale?
An old wives' tale actually is something that helps you do something or survive about something. An urban legend is just a story, a mythological story that's made up. They're completely different components of the English language.
So you don't know either?
No, I know exactly what it is. An old wives' tale is something like, if you kiss a frog, you'll get a wart. An urban legend is something that says, an urban legend is your fingernails and hair keep growing after you're dead.
Fair enough. Well, since you mentioned the nose and it keeps growing and I got a head start on everybody, it's a good thing that our nose continues to grow, because apparently our sense of smell, Kurt, is 10,000 times more sensitive than our sense of taste. And apparently 80% of what we think of as taste is actually smell. So
I get that.
I am blessed with a above average proboscis. Is that a Cyrano de Bergerac or perhaps a Charles de Gaulle reference? What did they call Charles de Gaulle?
The big nose.
No, but there was something like that.
Yeah.
I remember we talked about him in a previous episode, and he was known for his rather...
Same with Gerard Depardieu, by the way.
Gerard Depardieu. I thought Charles de Gaulle's defining characteristic was the airport outside of Paris, but apparently it was his nose.
Anytime you have a trivia question and someone says, do you know a French person in a movie? Gerard Depardieu, every time. Just answer.
Can you name one Gerard Depardieu movie?
Cyrano de Bergerac.
So yeah, well, brings it all together.
Yep.
There was another movie that he did before Cyrano that made him sort of popular in the American culture, but I can't recall what it is. Perhaps one of our listeners will reach out on Instagram or Twitter.
Because this is Smart Drivel, and because this episode is about amazing facts about the human body, and because you just talked about the nose, I'm going to give you something that I found, which I think is fascinating. I always thought this was urban legend, but I researched it and apparently it is true. A sneeze, John, blows out of your nose at what do you think the velocity is?
I know it's a pretty powerful force.
100 miles per hour.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how does that compare to something like a cough, Kurt?
A cough comes out at about, well, cough is in kilometers. So, it's kind of like the Canadian dollar. It's not even close to what our current is.
We got to work this whole global measurement system out. I remember we talked about the metric system, which is pretty much universal. And it's like the only countries that haven't adopted it are like the US and Myanmar or something like that.
It was Fahrenheit's birthday the other day. He was a man born in the former Poland whose parents died, and he escaped what he was doing. He escaped some apprenticeship in like a tannery and got really into thermometers and spent his whole life about thermometers and created a thermometer that actually was objective in its reading, where apparently it wasn't beforehand.
Well, it's better to be into thermometers, I think, than have thermometers be in you. When Fahrenheit died, do you have any sense of how big his nose and ears were?
No, but it was probably 451 degrees. See, I made a reference to Ray Bradbury there.
Thank you very much. Would that be Fahrenheit 451?
Yes, it would.
I remember we were talking about it at one point and neither one of us could get the number right, but we were like Formula 409. There are a lot of numbers in our heads. In fact, I saw some stat that by the time we die, we can recall on average around 150 trillion pieces of information. Now, I think that must mean that we must have them in our head. I think our ability to recall at the end of our life may not be at its all-time greatest because while our nose and ears grow, I do know that our brains shrink as we get older.
Do you know that Let It Be, written by Paul McCartney, he said that what inspired him to write that was Bridge Over Troubled Water, written by Paul Simon. Interesting.
Tell us more.
That's it. It was just, when you talked about we have all these trillion facts, for some reason, that's the one that popped into my head. I don't know why. It's a scary place, my brain.
That's what Smart Drivel is dedicated to, a bunch of those facts at the bottom of the list of things that you'd like to remember. So I do wonder, as we think about the longer term effects of the pandemic, whether shaking hands will ever fully return as a thing people do when they greet each other, at least in the cultures that shook hands before the pandemic. But I came across a fact that, believe it or not, Kurt, there are more germs transferred by shaking hands than kissing. Now, I don't want you to misinterpret this. The next time I see you, I think we should just elbow bump or something or fist bump. But if we had to greet somebody and we were trying to optimize for transferring the fewest number of germs, we're better off kissing each other than shaking hands.
So I think we should bring back glove wearing because I think gloves are pretty cool. First of all, they're very elegant, especially on women, the long gloves that come up to your elbow, like Audrey Hepburn, and Breakfast and Tiffany's. I love those. And with men, it always seems to be like, didn't Dastardly and Motley, didn't he have gloves that he put on?
I don't know if I would get a kick out of wearing gloves.
Driving gloves. You kidding me?
Oh, those were cool. I think I bought those when I was like first driving and I was like, this has got to be the coolest thing. And I put them in my glove box, which is why you have a glove box. Go. And I left them there, never to use them because I never sort of felt the moment that as I was driving around my 1970 something brown or green Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser with the wood grain sticker on the doors that I should really strap on my driving gloves because that attempt at cool would overcome the massive uncool happening around me.
But the emphasis that you can have in a conversation when you pause and you pull on the glove, what you're going to say next is pretty anticipative.
Ooh, anticipative. The other thing I like about gloves is I think we should return to slapping people with our gloves because that seems a lot less violent than other alternatives. But it's sort of a middle ground between doing nothing and doing something violent. So just sort of back and forth across someone's face.
I like
Nobody gets hurt, but they get a stern message. Better
to do that with a glove than with a dead fish. So I have a very interesting, amazing fact about the human body.
Please.
So I know you're a huge EDM fan, right? And
I do. I'm actually dancing to EDM in the background right now, but I'll cut it out of the audio track when we produce this episode.
I know when you go to Vegas and you buy a few bottles and you take off your shirt and you go, Well, guess what I found? And I think this is so darn cool. This is just like disco balls and everything else. Do you know that your heart can beat in synchronization to the rhythm when you're listening to music?
We have finally achieved synchronicity. All we need to do is listen to music. So our heart basically gets in step with the beat of the music, which is really interesting that your heart does that without any sort of conscious intervention, because I've yet to be able to translate the beat of the music to the movement of my body on a dance floor. So how is it that my heart can do it without thinking, but my body can't do it with thinking? This is one of the great mysteries, Kurt.
I don't know, but it's pretty cool. So the next time I'm listening to some cool music, by like, I don't know.
Maybe
Neil
like
Diamond.
Tone Loc doing Wild Thing.
Or Neil Diamond.
Well, isn't Tone Loc a little bit more EDM than Neil Diamond?
I don't know if Tone Loc is.
But Wild Thing, you don't think of that as sort of EDM?
Wild Thing is by the Trogs from the 60s.
I'm talking about Tone Loc's version of Wild Thing. Do you know it?
Yes, of course. You were talking about synchronicity, though, and that led me to probably the creepiest song of all time that we all loved in 1982. I'll be watching you every breath you take. What the hell, Sting?
And that's supposed to be a love song, or we interpret it as a love song, but clearly that is some seriously creepy behavior.
That guy made more money on that song. I guess he made enough there so he could just get into practicing tantric love for the rest of his life.
We should do a whole episode, Kurt, on songs that are largely misunderstood. Like that's seen as a love song where basically it's about a stalker.
Yeah.
And that is not a healthy form of love. In fact, it may not be love at all. So as we get older, Kurt, we are very conscious of the fact that our metabolism is slowing and we need to make sure that we're exercising to stay fit. I know that's something that you spend real time on. I have an exercise idea for you, Kurt. Actually, perfectly picked out for you.
Excellent.
You can lose 150 calories per hour by merely hitting your head against the wall.
What?
So if you were to hit your head against the wall for an hour, you will lose 150 calories. No idea how many brain cells you'd lose.
Okay. How hard? What's the velocity? Are you tapping or are you hitting?
I only have a temperature on that, just like you had the temperature of the guy's nose, as opposed to something more appropriate.
Because I could see doing it, but if it's when I was in college and it came because of Belushi in Animal House, I was one of those idiots who thought it was good to take a beer can and smash it against your head. And I also used to headbutt people, which is not smart, especially since I had 5 concussions as a youngster. And I probably had a lot more than I knew. I had 5 concussions in sports. And I'm sure doing these other things led to more concussions. So I'm probably not going to do the head against the wall banging.
Well, it's not only not smart, it's downright stupid to headbutt. I've done it myself, but I suspect you've done more of it.
You know who did a lot of it, I'm sure?
Who?
Harvey.
Very good. That's cute. Did we discuss Harvey Wallbanger in our episode about where all these famous named cocktails came from?
Yes, we did. Reference.
Yeah, so go back if you want to learn the origin of all these crazy drinks like Tequila Sunrise and Margarita and Harvey Wallbanger and the Manhattan. We have a whole episode dedicated. That was a fun episode, Kurt. Do you realize in the time it took me to make that last sentence, to say that last sentence, 50,000 cells in your body died? And that's not because you are special, Kurt. You are special, but not in this regard. 50,000 cells in our body died and were replaced by new ones while I was basically uttering that last sentence.
So I'm cool with it. You know, had you stopped and said 50,000 cells died, I'd be a little scared. But you added and were replaced by new ones. So that's fine.
Yeah, that's how I chose to unfurl it. I thought I would create a little bit of anxiety and tension first, Kurt. Then I would relieve that tension with the delivery. And while we're talking about cells dying, believe it or not, that the entire surface of your skin is replaced every month, which said another way means that you have about 1,000 different skins in your lifetime.
1,000 skins in your lifetime, but are they all the same? Imagine if they were different, how cool that would be.
Imagine if every month we had different skin. There'd be a lot more empathy in this world if 1 month we were Asian and 1 month we were, had Asian-like skin or African-American skin.
Talk about walk a mile in my shoes. Wear a skin in my life.
Live a month in my skin is definitely upgrading walk a mile in my shoes.
How about this? In the old, the old adage, not the urban legend and not the wives' tale, but the old adage, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog, which is fantastic. So in homage to the little guy who brings more, who punches above his weight, who brings more to the table than his size would allow you to see, do you know, and I found this fascinating, but it's actually, I get it. 50% of your hand strength comes from your little finger.
I did not know that, Kurt. Does that apply to, that's amazing. I will take better care of my pinkies from here on.
It's 20% of the number of digits, and probably when you look in size, 11% of total size of your digits, yet it's 50% of the strength. You know why I think that is? I know why that is, actually. Because what sets us apart from a lot of animals, like our lovable dogs, is opposable thumbs, which means you have the ability to grip. And so the farthest digit from your thumb when you're grabbing something is the pinky. So actually, you can grab a lot and make it opposable, just thumb and pinky. The other finger's just there for decoration and for flipping the bird. I
would have thought the thumb played a bigger role than the pinky. And if the pinky is 50%, the thumb can't be 50% because that would be no percent for the other three fingers, which seems unreasonable.
Do you know your thumb has a pulse in it?
Like a different pulse from the rest of the body?
Uh-huh.
Well, that's a fun fact about the body, Kurt. Well done.
Thank you.
All right. As we wrap this up, Kurt, I've got a couple. I did ask you recently how you would assess your spitting skill.
Not too good.
Well, don't feel bad because during your lifetime, Kurt, you will produce enough saliva to fill 2 swimming pools. I do not want to swim in that pool, Kurt.
Olympic size?
Probably not. The next time I jump in a pool, I will be dipping my toe in, not to test the temperature, but to test the viscosity.
But if you think about it, saliva's got to be pretty clean because it's got all these enzymes and stuff in there to break down food. So it's got to be
clean or not. Do you want to swim in a pool filled of human saliva?
If I needed to, I would, yes.
What circumstances would be required for you to decide you needed to?
If Rapunzel were in the drain of the pool and her hair got stuck there, I would swim through saliva to rescue her.
Okay, so you would do it to save someone's life. Okay. It's not a bad answer, Kurt.
So anyway, you just gave me one. I'll give you a good one, John, as we're going.
Go for it, Kurt. Go for it now.
The word muscle, right? Which we all have. We talked about word origins in a previous episode.
This is like throwback episode. We've had a lot of previous episode call outs.
The word muscle comes from a Latin term meaning little mouse, which is paulomus in Latin, paulomus, which is what the ancient Romans thought flexed biceps represented. Now, thank God you didn't do it, or we would have had, cockroach as the name of a muscle, but that's okay.
I believe you just attempted to insult me, Kurt.
Yeah, verbally, yes.
You made fun of my body in a non-visual medium as well. That's got to be very fulfilling for our audience.
It's easy to do in a non-visual medium.
Yeah, so spread across your lifetime, Kurt, you will spend an average of 1 whole year sitting on the toilet. Now, I want to be clear, Kurt, that is spread across your lifetime. So don't plan to spend 2022, the entire year, sitting on the toilet. Not how it's done. But think about that. We have a bunch of years on Earth, not that many, and we will end up spending one of them, when you add up all the time, sitting on the toilet, which is why you need to have good reading material.
Right. It's one of the most productive places to be.
When people ask me, do I read much? I tell people that I'll probably spend about a year of my life reading.
I used to read a book called The Bathroom Reader, and it was great. It was short synopses of great novels.
Keeping this in the gutter just for a second, because this is Smart Drivel and we have an obligation to live up to our name and brand. You fart enough in one day to fill a party balloon. So you could fill an entire balloon based on your farts in one day.
Okay. Well, again, it's part of the way the beautiful body works. So I guess that's okay. I think if we could harness all the things in a body that are wasteful, they would be very good for society. So look, to wrap up today's episode, I'm going to go back to where we started when you said you can't tickle yourself. I'm going to end it with tell you something else you can't do. You can't breathe and swallow at the same time.
You're right. We can't do them at the same time.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Next week, we're back with a whole new episode.
A whole new one.
Where we promise the drivel.
And hope for the smart. Goodbye, everybody.
Ciao, guys.